and welcome to another episode of the House of Decline podcast. It's been a while since I've talked about Palestine, but I feel the need to do it because it's still ongoing. It's still just as horrible as ever, and I feel with the weird amount of listenership this show has, it's worth talking about. And to talk about it, I have on comics writer, video game writer, Nadia Shammas.
Hello.
I've been reading her tweets for a while, and she's great. You should follow her on Twitter. You should read her books. And you are Palestinian-American, correct?
Yes, I am.
And I imagine the past few months have been pretty bad for you.
Yeah. Yeah, they've been pretty shit. I mean, God, honestly, I feel like the last few years have been so horrific. And every year I'm like, man, I hope the next one is the one where I get to chill. But nope. But I will say that, yeah, so for everybody here, hi, who doesn't know me, yeah, my name's Nadia. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and then I moved to Palestine with my grandmother to, try to go back. And I lived there until I was around 4 or 5. And then I actually found this out like recently that Israel literally was like, hey, we're gonna like take this kid. This kid doesn't have Palestinian paperwork. Like we can just deport the child. So my grandma was like, okay, well, all my daughters at this point have left. And she decided to come back with me. And so I moved back to Brooklyn and grew up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is like also been in the news a bit because it is like a very like Arab immigrant diaspora neighborhood in Brooklyn. So I did grow up with a bunch of Arabs as well. But Bay Ridge was also interesting because it's kind of very much like a mixed and kind of very political hotbed. We are we share the same representatives with Staten Island, which, as you can imagine, fucking sucks.
You need these guys. Hey, what are these Bay Ridge guys? What are they doing over here? We have our trash concerns. What are they feeling? Arab American diaspora.
It's funny that, that's exactly what my father sounds like, though. Like, no joke. My dad, like, straight up sounds like that. He literally, like, the best way I used to describe him is that I'm like, one time he was picking me up in his truck because my dad is a window shade construction worker. And he's owned a window shade making business my whole life, and I worked at it for most of my life as well. So I'm very familiar with New York construction sites. But I get in the car and my dad goes like, oh, have you seen The Irishman yet? And I'm like, no, I have not seen The Irishman. He's like, oh yeah, it's great. It's got all the greats. It's got Joe Pesci, it's got Bobby De Niro. And I'm like, Bobby, hold on. Like, do you mean, I'm sorry, your close personal friend Bobby? He was like, that motherfucker's from the Bronx, okay? He's Bobby. And I was like, and that was, yeah, and I'm like, that's my dad, basically. But like, yeah, if Tony Soprano was like a really weird Arab.
that sounds pretty good, actually. That's a very captivating premise, I have to say. Have you ever written about your
Oh yeah, I wrote a short comic that came out at the back of like a different crime comic called Newburn, and it was like a short comic called Brooklyn Zirconia, which 100% was like kind of a joke about uncut gems.
yeah, of course.
Because and it was about like my dad, and it was kind of like a fictionalized version of him and his brothers, who he has like a really horrifically weird relationship with, because like they came to America and he and his brothers hated each other, and at a certain point someone robbed my grandfather's house, and then my two uncles blamed my dad, and then my dad was convinced that they had staged the robbery to cut out of the will, and then they went into like a court case for like 10 years over the apartment that I grew up in Bay Ridge. This is all real.
And they're all Arab guys who talk like this. No, you stole the
no, but that's exactly right. That's exactly correct. They're all Arab dudes who sound like that.
That's fucking awesome. I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah. I mean, so you've been in contact with your parents and how
Yeah.
are they taking it, you know?
Well, obviously, like everyone's world is absolutely shaken. I mean, the thing is that so my family's from Bethlehem
Mm,
and in the West Bank.
yeah.
And so like obviously, they're kind of safer in quotes.
Hmm.
There's raids, there's like arrests. You never know what, could
Yeah.
happen. But the big like thing that is kind of very stressful is I have like two distant relatives who are sheltering at a church in Gaza.
Mm,
They were displaced very early on and they're, kind of older, so they've just been in like one of the dare. So
yeah.
like I'm just like keep waiting, basically being like, well, I hope you know, and it sucks because part of being Palestinian is this kind of inextricable violence from your life. Like you
Yeah.
find out about your relatives in the context of being killed by Israel or having been tortured by Israel or having had to leave because of X, Y, or Z. And that's kind of, all of the context of your family is in what's lost, kind of what's missing,
Hmm.
like and kind of the that's like you build your life around the absences of those people and that pain. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? And that's like the legacy of an ongoing settler colonial
Yeah.
yeah
And
thing.
it's a fucking nightmare because I
Yep.
mean that is the Jewish experience, that
Yeah.
is the story we tell at Passover. That's what we say, and it's like
Hmm.
we have become Pharaoh. And what does why how, did all of our stories are literally about not doing stuff like this? And
It's that's the thing is that like,
uh,
people like it's so wild because, like I don't want to do the like I have Jewish friends thing and we talk about this, but like we do,
you
right? Like we
do, because
have
if I mean
like
you're in the West, you have the same cultural signifiers
yeah,
and values.
exactly.
It's easy, you can share information.
Yeah, exactly. So we do talk about it about like that's the thing is that you have these kavas about like this relative who died in the Holocaust or this relative who was displaced from their home during like the movements of whatever. And it's just like, yeah, that really sucks that it's happening now. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? It's like, yeah, but you know, yeah, it's just it's so painful. It's
yeah,
just a real painful thing because there's a lot uh Jerusalem, I think that about this a lot. Like, why would people not think that Jerusalem was just like the New York of the ancient world? You know
mm,
what I mean? That it was like a center hub of history, right? It was it was like kind of the capital of I think the Silk Road at a certain point. And it's just like between the Crusades, it was such a point of global interaction and multiculturalism that I don't understand why people can't like, imagine if someone just came and split New York in half and said one kind of person can live here now. Like, I
yeah,
think people cannot perceive that level of tragedy upon like us because that would, they can't imagine us like them
yeah.
because we're not white.
Yeah. Well, I think also if you live in North America and you're just sort of trained to believe that we were just always here, you sort of get a blind eye for what is and what isn't colonialism too. You don't recognize Israel as colonialism because it's sort of, I mean, especially one of the most egregious things is the pink washing which goes on. Oh,
Mm.
they're nice here to the gays, so they get to murder, which is like it's fucking what? How is that the logic that you're, the one-to-one thing? And it's
And
like,
also, like, gay marriage is not legal in Israel. So
no,
that's like the wild part to me is I'm like, bro, like, it's not even like, bro, not even Palestinian Israeli marriages aren't legal in Israel.
yeah,
Like, I know, I literally have one of my aunt married a man who is half Palestinian, half Israeli, whose parents eloped and fled because of the fact that those marriages are not allowed to exist in Israel. So, like, you don't even have, like, bro, like, you can't even have, like, Israeli Palestinian marriages, much less gay marriages. What is this, like, ethno state white race
but they
blood
don't
purity
understand
shit?
because it's like it's also sort of the logic of do you know about the quiverful movement?
No, I don't.
The Quiverful movement was what the Duggars of like 23, not 23, the 26 Kids and Counting, the family on TLC
Oh,
that had a lot of
yeah.
kids. And then it was embroiled in a scandal, like when one of the
Mm-hmm.
children was turned out to be really messed up,
Mm-hmm.
and did some bad stuff to one of the other children. And but they were part of this movement called the Quiverful movement. And the idea is it's like a have as many children as possible idea, because it's your quiver full of arrows and you're launching
Wow.
these children out into the world to spread this type of like breeding version of Christianity.
That's
And
crazy.
the where they got that idea directly from is Haredi West Bank settlers, which
That's
is
so wild.
and that's where that they were specifically inspired by Haredi West Bank. And speaking of which, it's the West Bank settlers. It's always a guy from the West Bank who comes and shoots up the Tel Aviv Pride Parade every year. And then,
That's so
they put
true.
him in prison and then he gets out and then he shoots it up
The
immediately
next
after
year.
again. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Pretty
it's,
much.
people, people don't, people really don't understand the level of depravity that's at work here. Like they don't understand about Ben Gavir and all the
Yeah.
like they don't know how crazy these people really are. They think it's normal. We support them. This is capitalism. This is
Yeah.
democracy, right? No, this is way beyond that at this point. It's
Yeah.
gone into full on, and it can only be called fascism, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fully. No,
I'm full.
it's
I can't. I'm not uncomfortable saying that this is an ethno-fascist state.
I mean, that's the thing is that ethno-nationalism, it's just so unnatural. It's just literally never happened under naturally occurring circumstances. People travel, people are interested in other cultures, people integrate. Like this is the way of, social animals that we
Mm-hmm.
are. Like Israel, something I find really fascinating about kind of Israel's whole language is this kind of constant trying to differentiate Palestinians as animals, to Palestinians as like, insects, Palestinians as members of the like of
Yeah.
not human class. But the thing about that is like human animal, human animal, I've never heard a phrase that is just so like real,
Mm-hmm.
I like, you know, because that's what we are. There's no shame in being an animal. We are social creatures. That's what we are and where we came from. We're
Yeah.
part of like this earth. So it really, when you think about it, it's just there is no naturally occurring ethno state, like a real true ethno state. You
Yeah.
have to annihilate everyone else except the group of people you have decided to keep in power. And you have to do that ongoing because
Mm-hmm.
people will keep trying to come in and stuff. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? For like another example of that for me is very early in this genocide when they started losing the Palestinian workforce,
Mm-hmm.
the cheap labor,
Yeah.
and that was coming in from Gaza. And then Israel started looking in other countries like India, looking for workers and trying to make deals for workers. And you would see on like Israeli Reddits and stuff, people complaining, and they would be like, "Oh, I don't want like these people here. Like, I don't want it to look like this. I don't want to look like that."
Yeah.
And the thing about that is there always has to be a servant brown underclass for
Mm-hmm.
Israel to run as a settler colony, right? It's
Yeah.
like you still like
Same way America does with, I mean,
the way
look at
Dubai
the
does even.
immigration freaking, yeah,
Yeah.
all these, yeah, or Qatar to some degree. I
Yeah,
mean, I like their
exactly.
media, but they got some problems.
Yeah, for real though.
But who among us? Either way, Al Jazeera is a great network. Sana Saeed, she's great.
Yeah, no, man, it's rough because like I hate that the quality of news in the West has degraded to such an extent. And,
Yeah.
and we're seeing it now in like the layoffs and stuff. And it's just going to be Google search doesn't even work, man. And
Oh yeah,
it's
it's
all
fucked up.
connected.
I got to go to DuckDuckGo now. I got to go to Bing now.
Bing.
It's
I
Bing
can't,
will overtake it.
God, Bing was the tortoise and the tortoise and the hare all
Maybe.
along.
Yeah, it's gonna be Bing now.
It's
It's
going to be
just
Ask Jeeves all over again.
Xbox eventually got it right with the 360, and Bing played the long game. And now all of those TV shows where they use Bing for searches won't seem so stupid now.
They were looking to the future.
Yeah, they knew. But yeah, it fucking I think that's the other thing that I was thinking about is just the sense of normalization to the gaslighting,
Hmm.
constantly. The idea that I mean, for you, I'm sure it's very easy to resist because you have personal experience with this. But like everyone sort of, even people who are motivated on this, get inured by this just constant drumbeat of like distraction and
Yeah.
entertainment. And
Yeah.
sometimes as an entertainer, I feel like I'm part of that drumbeat of distraction, which is why, I try and do things that are more. I mean, I know you do a lot of like educational, or try and like sublimate your experiences through artwork in a constructive way. Like do you feel
Yeah.
like how do you go about that?
I guess like the way that I feel about it is just kind of like the reason I even started writing, and I started writing at like a pretty young age, was kind of the world was so overwhelming to
Yeah.
me that I could not understand it. It just kind of seemed like arbitrarily cruel and lacking
Mm-hmm.
and very lonely. And so I would kind of try to write things out emotionally to express myself, but also almost in a way to like understand what I was even feeling or thinking. And so it's kind of through my writing that I'm able to like process my own experience back to me, and especially through kind of a layer of fiction, because that allows me to be more honest with myself because I can pretend it's happening to someone else, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it kind of creates a structure in my mind, in my very, this year I got diagnosed with moderate to severe ADHD, so that
Dang.
makes sense too. But yeah, so I guess like I just felt very fractured, and the kind of writing was my way of like getting back together, and trying to like create a space for myself to
Yeah.
understand anything. So I think that writing still serves that purpose for me now, even as like a professional writer. And I think that like, yeah, I kind of have to understand my own experience and kind of try to like
Mm-hmm.
desperately share it with someone. But, kind of, but, so everything I do will be under the perspective of being Palestinian, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think also a big part of it is because being Palestinian and even saying Palestinian, or even like, having the view of Palestinian is so heavily policed
Mm-hmm.
that like it kind of you kind of learn to like just kind of hide it and also walk with it. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of times where you have to decide whether you're going to say Arab American or Palestinian American because you want
Yeah.
to decide if you're going to be in a fight or not.
Yeah.
Because people's reaction to you is so immediate and violent when they find out that you're Palestinian. My whole life, not now, just like as like a random person in any space. It's
Yeah.
just like people find out you're Palestinian, they get so immediately emotional and intense about it that you
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, that's I can't imagine you introduce yourself as, I am so sorry, that
Yeah, it
it's
would be, it's one or the other. It's either like, oh my gosh, that's crazy,
yeah.
or it's like, why are you people always like that? And I'm like, oh my
Oh
God,
my God.
please.
That one's much worse, I
Well,
imagine.
but that's the thing, is that one was like way more common until recently, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like as a kid growing up, and here's another piece of context for everybody, I guess, is that like, so I grew up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, but I was in New York when 9/11 happened, and I grew
Mm,
up in New York when 9/11 happened. And Bay Ridge is the neighborhood where people would come to like fuck up Arabs. I mean, and it happened at the beginning of this, at the very beginning in October. They actually had to shut down the schools in Bay Ridge for a day because people came to Bay Ridge in their cars waving Israeli flags, were asking random kids on the street if they were Palestinian, and then jumped a few teens.
uh,
And like, so I was, and someone like, yeah, pe like someone threw a brick through my window, like
yeah.
when I was in school, like, you know what I mean? So like, I kind of, it was
Jesus.
so,
Fuck it.
yeah, it was so kind of viscerally intense to like be a visible Arab that like for me, I think I spent a lot of time trying to like not be Arab. Like I was spent a lot of time like, online I just would use like white names and like white people's pictures for like a bit when I was a preteen.
Mm,
And like I would just Yeah, man, it was just like it was dark because you would just turn on the TV and it would be like Hillary Duff telling you to support the troops in Iraq,
Yeah.
and you see Abu Ghraib and like everyone's like, yeah, but you deserve that.
Yeah, no,
It's
they
just kind
were,
of
yeah, it was
yeah.
very casually murderous. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of always been like that. And all that happened now is just that it's been confirmed to me, like beyond a shadow of a doubt, that like my worst nightmares, which included stuff like when I was a kid, I remember having nightmares, like reoccurring nightmares that they made it legal to arrest Palestinian Americans in America.
Mm.
And I would have like nightmares about like looking for my mom in Bay Ridge while the like cops were trying to get me. And at the end of those nightmares, they always shot me. Like they never like arrested anyone when they found Palestinians. They would always just kill them on sight.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is that like as a kid and until recently, I was like, man, imagine how paranoid your mind has to be, like how hunted you have to feel for those to be your dreams as a kid. But now I'm like, no, that was an accurate assessment. That
Yeah.
was like an accurate, like that was no, that was nailing like exactly what the
Yeah.
level of reality is. My brain was just synthesizing what my truth was.
Hmm.
And I guess my art is me synthesizing what my truth is. And my truth is always going to just be Palestinian because it's not like anyone else is going to let me forget it for even a second, you
Oh
know?
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's always something I'm very interested in. It's like sometimes you try and escape your identity to normalize. I'm always like in terms of like the composer Felix Mendelssohn,
Hmm.
who I love. I think is like one of the great composers, and he was seen as sort of conservative in his time. And part of this conservatism, I'm sure, was driven by his desire to fit in with mainstream German society. His grandfather was a guy called Moses Mendelssohn, who was a very famous Jewish philosopher, and his son was a merchant, sort of the unimpressive middle generation, and decided to convert to Christianity in order to get along with the Gentiles better. And Felix, all throughout his life, he was raised as a Gentile. He was raised as a Christian, and he wrote "Hark the Herald Angels Sing,"
Wow.
one of the most
Okay.
beautiful hymns,
Yeah.
and but he was dogged all the time by Judaism. It was called inferior Jewish music,
Jesus.
and
Yeah.
I always think that is, but it's like the same thing of like as a gay person, Roy Cohn in like Angels in America. The
Hmm.
world will not
Yeah.
let you forget what you are, so why betray it? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's the thing is that that's totally it, is that like at a certain point, I think, as late as like I think it was genuinely when I was working on Squire, when I started like doing like kind of my hardcore research into like Ottoman and Byzantine history,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I was like, oh, I want to like, really kind of create a well-rounded world. But like I realized as I was writing the story, despite, doing our months of world building, that like the thing that was pulling me along was the emotional core of the story. And the
Mm-hmm.
emotional core story was 100% what it is to be a Palestinian American living in the post 9/11 America, like growing up during
Mm-hmm.
that, during a really formative time. Like what happens to you? And
Yeah.
you do get put in a position where you have to choose, right? Like you got to choose whether you are going to, because what whiteness is to me is that like it's not real, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a structure. It's a homogeny that you can throw away your culture to become part of. So either you throw away your culture to try to, kind of ascend the ranks of whiteness, or you turn your back on that altogether and go back to who you are. And, that kind of writing Squire was one my moment. I think that when I was figuring out what that book was alongside Sarah, I had to like be very emotionally honest with myself with like what is heroism, what is truth to me, and kind of doing that untangling made me realize like no, I am a person who fiercely loves being Palestinian. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm a person who loves Palestine and loves everything about my people.
Yeah.
And like I can't and I've my whole life been trying to find, white people to pat me and tell me that I'm like good enough to deserve being alive, I guess, because that's what, that's where you're
Sure.
left, right?
Yeah.
When you're there. But like I realized, especially now, I don't care what a single white person thinks of me ever again.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
But,
and
I mean, look
it's
what they
yeah.
did.
Yeah, it
How did
kind
they have
of
the moral high ground, you
I
know?
know, and
Uh,
that's the thing. I think that's the thing that a lot of like white executives specifically, because we're in creative industries,
mhm.
they aren't really, I don't think they're aware of how much that's changed now. I don't think they're aware of how much like, Black and Indigenous and brown creators are just like this has totally shifted our kind of our understanding. It has taken, I know, me certainly, but a lot of others off the defensive, which is where we were.
Yeah.
Is kind of the like, hey, we got to operate within this system. We got to, like compromise. Yeah, we got to like, we got to, we got to play the game. And now I think we're all like, we don't give a single shit about any of these accolades, any of these institutions, and like just it's about kind of community and truth
Yeah.
now. And, so like, I don't think they're going to be able to shortchange people for as long as they think they do. They've been
Yeah.
getting away with that shit for way too long.
Yeah. Is there so the I feel like there is a canonical graphic novel about Palestine, which is Joe Sacco's book, which I haven't
Yes.
read actually. But do you
I'm a big
have you
fan of that
read
book.
the
I have read it.
what are your impressions?
I love that book. I
Yeah.
think Joe Sacco's Palestine is an incredible resource. I think that it is like one of the peaks of like nonfiction graphic work.
Hmm.
I think that like this is like a journalist who understands the medium and like uses it beautifully and like really genuinely, it, I think it's invaluable. I'm like, hey, if you want an intro primer to Palestine,
Hmm.
Joe Sacco's Palestine is gonna be a really good intro point.
Yeah.
And even, I think it was genuinely put out in the 90s.
Yeah.
And it
It's
and
pretty
it's been
amazing, pretty
yeah,
astonishing actually that
yeah.
he was because that you could really they would really fuck your shit up in
Oh
the
yeah,
90s for that.
for sure. And and it's so fucked up, but like it's just as true today. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, they still really fuck your shit up. But I mean, that's the issue is like we were talking about earlier. Has Hasbara gotten worse? Or what's the deal with it? Because it seems like Israel's just own propaganda, its own footage that it takes and puts out there. Like, I mean, months ago, we heard about the semen retrieval thing, and it was like,
Hmm.
this is supposed to get us on your side? This is not normal people don't do the cum retrieval unit.
Yeah.
That's not like a normal thing that and they
Yeah.
were like promoting it as like this is the harrowing tale of how we retrieved my husband's cum off the battlefield. What? And it's like every zoomer I see who's like watching these like Israel TikToks is like this
What
isn't
are
they're
you
not
doing? Well,
what is
that's the thing. I think that like there's a lot going on here where I'm like, I think that like it's not so much that it's gotten worse because I think it's always been this bad, honestly, but I
yeah.
think that like they don't have the language anymore. Like they don't understand the language of the internet whatsoever. They like
Mhm.
do not know what the what like how to make things for the internet.
Mhm.
Like in terms of like any of it, like not like the speed or like what the internet likes or like what, you know what I mean? They just really don't get it. And
Yeah,
it's
they don't get the humor. It's all they don't get like
none
the
of it.
Tim and Eric. It's basically everything's Tim and Eric now, right? Tim and
Yeah.
Eric just made everything Tim and Eric, and yeah, they just don't like you see those like
Well,
that
we're
Israel
not.
SNL show with like Brett Gelman and Michael
Yeah,
Rappaport are on it,
because the
and
thing
it's just
is
painfully unfunny. Like I don't get it. What's happening?
well, I think media overall just is not, it has just is not in touch with the current day whatsoever. Like,
You know?
this is like, everyone is treating it like we're in the 2000s or like, and I'm like, we are not in a good position. Financially, economically, America, everyone is doing so poorly right now. And like, people have seen so much death. Things have gotten so much worse. You are not pitching the same kind of humor to a group of winners anymore. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Who can laugh and like have nothing to lose.
We are the dominant because we used to be the dominant ones, right? But
Yes,
now like
exactly.
you have
It's like,
more solidarity as like a millennial or a zoomer with the people who are under the thumb of the cackling
Israel
overlords.
cannot possibly understand gallows humor. Like
Yeah.
and we are all just making jokes on a 24/7 basis about how high we are and how much we want to kill ourselves.
Yeah.
Like Israel does not understand that. Palestine gets it. I'll tell
Yeah.
you what. Because that's
Yeah.
like because we've been making jokes about that shit forever. I still remember like years and years ago seeing a video of like a young dude getting arrested by a bunch of IOF dudes who were taking him to like a tank, and he breaks free of their hold, runs up to the tank, and he's like, "I call shotgun, haha." And it's like, they're gonna beat the shit out of you for that. But the point is fuck you, right? The
Yeah.
point
Yeah.
is fuck you. Point is you're not gonna break me. And point is that I'm still laughing at you because you're nothing to me. And that's like closer to humor where the rest of us are at, even as
Yeah.
Americans, than what, kind of like where SNL or even like moneyed media is, because we don't have shit anymore and we are
Yeah.
all miserable, and they don't know how to make jokes to us because
Yeah.
they don't know that. They don't know what that feels like.
Yeah, I punching up or punching down. I think you can punch down and still make good humor, but you
Hmm.
can't be authoritarian and make good humor. You
But you
can't
can't
be
be like a fascist and be funny about it,
yeah.
basically, anymore.
Yeah. I mean, there was like I mean, that's the problem is the Trump era was the invention of the funny fascist, right? It
Yeah.
was all these clown fascist guys like Trump and,
Yeah.
or even like Bolsonaro, or
Hmm.
like now they got that Milei guy in Argentina who's like a clown
Oh,
fascist as
Jesus.
well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so these guys who are like either intentionally or unintentionally, there is something that is like amusing or clownish about them. And that's what, sort of creates this sense that they're harmless or they're more
Hmm.
harmless than they actually are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mean, Israel doesn't, I mean, they are clownish in a lot of ways. Bibi does seem very clownish to me, but in like a nightmarish, awful way. But
Yeah.
so does Biden, I guess, because it's like
Yeah.
you have this guy who's this innocuous, senile guy who's just been fucking
Yeah.
behind this massive bloodletting.
It's basically like best case scenario, he is so senile, he has no idea what's going on, which is still horrifying because you are letting that man lead the country. Worst case scenario, he is a genocidal psychopath who is, totally fine letting people know that he really doesn't care. And maybe even pretending to be a little senile to see how far he can get away with that
Yeah.
shit, because why not? You know, like it is no good in either way. I am genuinely shocked that the Democratic Party is like, no, we're willing to destroy our entire party over this. Like we'll end the whole bit for this guy and for this train of thought. But like it's again, I'm like, I just think that these people, these leaders, they don't exist in our world anymore. They are
Yeah.
old, and I mean that in many ways. They are old world. Like
Yeah.
this is, they are the remnants, Henry Kissinger's children. They are the
Yeah.
remnants of the 20th century, and you are not going to sell an Iraq war to a bunch of like people who have been sheltering for like 2 years possibly and have now been thrust back into the workforce. Everything is worse. Everything is worse. Everything works worse. Everything costs more.
Mhm.
Jobs are not stable. Like it is like, what are you going to get
You
these
have
people to
failed to
cheer
prevent
for?
any of that. You
Yeah,
have
like
done nothing about that shit, but you're
and Joe
giving these
Biden didn't
billions
even
of
help us
dollars.
with our
Yeah.
student loans.
Yeah.
Like the student loan thing was such a flop on such a major level that I can't believe they didn't just spend the rest of their time trying to chase what a devastating, stupid thing that was. Of like saying you're going to help everyone with $10,000 and then being like, oh, whoopsie, the Republicans said no. And
Yeah.
now you're just doing this. You're just seeing how the money just seems to flow out of every pocket for war. It's just like it
Yeah.
is I keep saying like we're in, this is Joe Biden thinks this is like Iraq and we're in Vietnam right now. Like this is a
Yeah.
disaster.
I mean, it is very much like the parallels to Iraq, especially how October 7th, people compare it to 9/11. Also, in the sense that it seems like, I don't know, Israel, it's hard to believe that the most advanced surveillance military in the world where there are multiple reports where Egypt said there would be an attack on the 7th. America told you there would be an attack on the 7th, and it happened. I'm not going to get into full
Hmm.
conspiracy mode about this, but it also seems like just that leading to something that justifies uh, 30 times, 40 times more the amount of casualties, and
Yeah.
not just casualties, but also starvation and like
No,
white
this is
phosphorus and
I
torture.
will tell you, like, for real though, that genuinely first, like, October, I turned to my partner at one point and I literally said, every time Israel starts up, there's a fear in me that they're going to do it this time. They're going to kill every single person in
Yeah,
Gaza. They're going to do it.
yeah.
And like, I know that's crazy. I know that's crazy, but what if they do it this time? And then, we have to be like, that would be that would be nuts. There's no way. And now I'm like, no, they're totally no,
They're
yeah,
trying.
no,
No, they're really trying this
they're
time.
really trying this time. And
Yeah,
they try every time, but
yeah,
this is the time
yeah.
that I think, it's
Well,
the
he's saying
president that we
final
have.
solution stuff as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's very that. And I think that, they know that when they stop, it's over. They cannot lose the momentum
yeah,
because it will all come crashing down behind them.
yeah,
If they keep looking for a way out and hoping that if they extend the carnage, maybe there's a way out through more Palestinian destruction and death. Because
yeah,
what we've lost is like it's immeasurable, right? It's like institutions, it's learning, it's history,
yeah.
it's civilization.
The oldest churches and mosques in the
Yeah,
world.
yeah,
It's
like libraries, academics. We've lost poets, we've lost like doctors, family bloodlines, histories. I know someone who lost like 30 family members in one day.
yeah,
It's just it's like there is like we're beyond the point where there's anything further to kind of say on the terms of like harm prevention.
yeah,
Like that's it. Like there's nothing that's gonna ever be okay again for
yeah,
Palestinians.
yeah.
None of us are gonna be okay again. I mean, I can tell you also that like I had repressed memories from the Second Intifada come
Hmm.
back when
You were
this
in the
started.
Second Intifada?
No, I wasn't in it, but I had totally forgotten all the coverage I had seen until I started remembering all the stuff. Um, and uh, and my, other Palestinians I talked to also talked about that. My stepmother, who is from Lebanon and lived in Lebanon,
Hmm.
through several civil wars and up until like 10 years ago when she, moved to New York with my dad.
Hmm.
But she told me that she kept thinking, all right, it's time to go to the basement because like they're going to start shelling soon,
Uh,
like Israel will. And then she has to remind herself every day that she's like in New York and it's like 40 years later. But like, this like we are like the level of casual trauma that has landed on the laps of most like Arabs, but especially Palestinians is just like, yeah, I'm never going to be the same again.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Well, this is, I mean, because it's all been the horrifying since October, the sense that it's been 70 years leading up to this. This is the
Hmm.
moment. This is the crescendo. Of this.
Yeah.
All of it has been horrible, and since the Nakba, it's just been this endless stream of destruction. But
Yeah.
this is the pivot point,
Yeah.
on which not just relations with Palestinians, but the entire Middle East will revolve around this moment.
I
And
genuinely think the whole world. I think that this
yeah,
is like, I mean, we're seeing kind of the this really interesting mobilization of the global South, right? And
yeah,
and bringing these like, European and these genocidal countries
yeah,
and to the courts. And I think it's really important because it is providing like a concrete record of
yeah,
genocide. and a historical record of genocide. And it's also kind of a really fun fuck you to the countries who set
Yeah.
up those courts to be
Yeah.
like, we're gonna drag you to your own fucking courts.
You get
Fuck
to
you
tell
guys.
the white people directly and dance circles around them when they make their like, oh, Israel's not as bad because they aren't killing as many people as they could be killing. That's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
best argument they
And
have.
I mean, the thing is that, like you said, Rafat, he was killed with an airstrike in the second, in I believe in the second floor
Yeah.
with, his sister's family, and that shows you that like they can make very precise strikes when they
Mm-hmm.
want to. They simply choose not to. And the thing is that this I don't want to. I believe that this is a crescendo in terms of scale, but
Mm-hmm.
this level of cruelty is very par for the course. This
Oh,
has
yeah.
just kind of been how mean and cruel and evil and murderous it has been for Palestinians uh, forever. Like, I have a story of someone in my family uh, that had been kidnapped by some IOF, and
Mm-hmm.
they, kept holding a gun to his head, and they kept telling him like, "Hey, we're gonna shoot you," and in 3, 2, 1, and then they wouldn't shoot.
Yeah.
And he developed a psychological disorder where he thought he was dead for like he was convinced that
He had
he was
Cotard
already dead.
syndrome.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. I know
And
that one
like,
for some
yeah,
reason.
yeah, and it's like I'm like, hey, do you like that's it. That's all I know about that person, right? Like that's just like, and those are just casual stories you have. Like those are not, and I'm just like, yeah, I guess I'm just spilling all this out also because, as of today, as a recording day, there, Israel did reject another ceasefire negotiation.
Yes.
Um,
Because they want
yeah,
it, like you said, they need to keep it going. Because
they
once
have to
this
keep it
stops,
going.
it's like then it's like the dust settles, and it's like
Yeah,
they'll never
basically
be able to do anything like this again.
Basically, yeah, this was kind of, I think that this even, like personally, I think that this escalated to the way it did, not because Israel like pre-planned that they wanted to commit this genocide now, but because they were, Israel always acts up most when they're humiliated.
Yeah.
And when they feel that they need to crush, Palestinian spirit and also crush, solidarity.
Hmm.
And they always escalate further and further the more they feel that like they're losing the grasp of the situation.
Hmm.
And I think that that's kind of, I think the level of global solidarity really fucked them up. I think
Yeah.
they really did not know what to do, and they only went to what they know how to do, which is kill fast
Yeah.
and kill and torture and do, horrific war crimes. And it's because, like they just don't know how to react to this moment. And yeah, I just genuinely think that the level of cruelty is to destroy Palestinian hope of a Palestinian future and infrastructure, but and to just like maybe if I kill, the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Right.
Very that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, but yeah, that is the thing of a fascist state. They killed. I mean, Yitzhak Rabin wasn't a good guy. He was still into liberal Zionism,
Yeah.
but he was at least like, oh, if we want our state to keep going, we have to make some concessions to. And then they murdered him because they didn't
Yep.
want that. They wanted they wanted to murder everybody because
Yep.
it's an ethno nationalist project.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I'm like, man, I think a lot about like there's going to need to be a lot of reprogramming, like de-cult shit going on,
yeah,
culturally. And that's going to be fascinating.
yeah. I mean, it's really. I mean, Biden and like. I mean, now the fucking guy is Fetterman as well, who seems like
Hmm.
not just like APAC funded, but like genuinely philosophically invested in the idea of like Israel as this. I don't know, cosmic underdog. I mean, the problem is free. I live in the center of the city. There's always
No
there's always
worries.
sirens passing by because
I grew up
people
in
out there.
Brooklyn.
You know what I mean. But yeah, so these people seem very ideologically committed to Israel beyond, whatever sort of material funding they might be getting from moneyed interests or whatever. Um, like Fetterman, you see him waving the Israeli flag on a trolley. But what a fucking Man, that guy. Man, I really
And
don't like that
man,
guy.
him too. I can't help but wonder if it was just the humiliation. Was it just like, is it just this guy putting his foot down because he's like, at this point you've gone too far, and if you can't turn back, you gotta prove that you were right and that you're not bothered, and you gotta own the libs. Like what exactly? Like I'm like, man, is it just the ego? I wonder,
I think it has to be because it
right?
seems like that's what the entire project is. It's a big
Yeah,
ego project. It's all about, I mean, I think you were saying before, it is like the high school bully. Or,
yeah.
or have you ever like known a nerd who was like horribly bullied and then they were like they sniff, they go there, you'll see, and then they get like really buff and aggressive and like everybody hates them now because it's like a and I feel like that's sort of the archetype, or like what happened to Dave Chappelle.
Have you seen like Social Network, the movie?
Yeah, yeah, I like
You
that
know the
movie.
very opening where she's like, you're gonna think that everyone hates you because you're a nerd, but it's really because you're an asshole.
Yeah.
Like I think that's that's
Nation
the
of
thing.
Zuckerbergs, goddamn
Yeah.
nation of freaking Zuckerberg, and it's not anti-Semitic because I am Jewish, so I can say it. We can say goddamn, yeah, dead-eyed Jesse Eisenberg.
No, I mean, and I say that as like someone who's like, that's one of my favorite movies. I
That's
love that
the
movie.
best. But I
It's
I
the
mean
it's
I'm
the
not a
best.
Fincher guy or a Sorkin guy, and I think that movie is the fucking best.
I love that movie. And I
Yeah, yeah.
say that with like having like being like all the love in my heart. But like that line, I'm like, I've met so many guys like that,
Oh yeah,
the like guys who are like, they're convinced it's because they're like, oh, it's like because I'm nerdy and I'm too smart and I'm too real and
yeah,
people hate that about me. And it's like, no, it's because you're the fucking worst.
yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lot
But
of that's John
that
Fetterman to
is
me.
it's the Jewish thing too of like being disgusted at your own weakness. Like you hear stories about Holocaust survivors in Israel who were shunned because like the tough
Yeah,
Israeli guys were like, you were weak, you allowed yourself
yeah,
to get caught. Even how they treat the hostages is like, you're
yeah,
weak, you allowed yourself to get
yeah,
caught. We,
yeah.
we don't have to worry about actually getting you back. We can just blow you up because you were weak.
Because
You
they
allowed
don't
yourself to
actually
get caught.
care about like Jewish people. They care about like they care about Israelis. They care about Zionists. And that's
Yeah.
like why that's so important to make that distinction because like they care about the Zionist project. They do not care about the safety of the Jewish people. Otherwise, they would not do any of the shit they have done. Um,
Yeah.
including yeah.
Yeah, and giving people a legitimate, if you're doing this in my name, I'm a Jewish person, you're giving, and like people believe you're doing it in my name, then you're giving them a very legitimate reason to hate me. So it's,
I mean, that's kind of the thing about the like the Star of David. Like, I'll be very honest with you, is that like every time I see it on someone, I have to have a moment where I'm like, okay, there is a 50% chance that it's just Jewish person, all cool, all
yeah.
good. 50% chance this is a Zionist and things are about to get so fucked up right now for
Yeah,
me.
yeah, no, it's not
Yeah, and
good.
that's the scary part is that it's not like, and also the point is to create that like the subterfuge, right? The subterfuge of Jewish symbolism
Yeah.
to represent the powers of a government, of an ethno-state government, the will of an ethno-state government. Again, like it's like, it's sort of like we can see now, especially with Biden, with all of these protests, and they're barely making the news, and no one in the White House gives a shit about any of them, no matter how big they are. And people are still, media is just still doing their thing. It's because they don't care. They don't really care what you think. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? And Israel, very similarly, does not actually care what Jewish people think. They just
No.
care about what the power structure is and what the symbolism is. That's what they want to last,
Yeah. I
you
mean,
know?
that is the structure of fascism is this sort of postmodern idea of power for power's sake, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Whatever we, and it comes from this sort of like idea of that we shall never be humiliated as Jewish people again. It's like when we say Holocaust never again, right? It's obviously that should mean no one should experience a Holocaust again, but these people interpret it as it won't happen to us. And in
Yeah.
order for it to not happen to us, we need to destroy some sort of existential enemy. And
Yeah.
that will be, we need as a fascist state, we need the outgroup to justify the continuance of our
Yes.
fascist state.
100%.
And that is the Palestinians. But that's the thing. If they eliminate all the Palestinians, the thing with fascism is that they'll go to Jordanians, they'll go
Yeah.
to Lebanese, they'll go to somewhere else
100%.
because it needs keep having an outgroup. It's this cancerous thing, which is why it's got to be stopped
Yep.
immediately.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the other thing is like, I mean, the frustration too that I always have is immensely difficult to deal with is you do donate money to like PCRF or
Hmm.
you'd go to protest, you write, you educate, but the thing you really want to be doing is putting your body in front of a kid,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you can't
Yeah.
because, one, you're geographically over there, and two,
Yeah.
that killing yourself won't, it won't,
Help. Yeah.
yeah,
Won't help.
but
No, I mean yeah, that's a real, I mean, especially like as a Palestinian abroad, right? Like I've always contended with the fact that I know my tax dollars are going to go pay for Israel, that when I
yeah.
go like buy certain stuff, it's gonna go give money to Israel.
Mm,
And I've known that like my entire life, right? That's just like being Palestinian in America knows that you are going to be paying for the subjugation of your own family back home.
mm-hmm,
Um, and what do you do with that culpability, right?
mm-hmm,
And it's sort of like it's very hard for myself right now to keep reminding myself that I am also Palestinian and that I need to, keep myself alive as well because I'm part of the, you know, Palestinian diaspora. At this point, every single Palestinian is like a living historian of their people, right? Like we're
yeah,
kind of a living, cultural artifact who, and because as long as I've remembered, the big thing of, in my family at least was like memory, right? Is like
yeah,
we have to remember what was lost. We have to remember who was lost. I mean, and we said that about that in the shared cultural Jewish experience. I mean, it goes down to Palestinians naming their children after ethnically cleansed cities that no
yeah,
longer exist in areas which are now, Israeli cities still stand on top of.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, it's sort of like you're like, what can I do? What can I do from where I am? And I guess the only thing is kind of the ongoingness, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint.
mm-hmm,
I think a lot about something I read about Angela Davis recently about
yeah,
kind of how in her 40s she stopped smoking and started running and like ate less red meat. And I think about, kind of what we've lost and who we've lost very intentionally. A lot of figures like Fred Hampton and
yeah,
Hassan Kanafani were assassinated, but on purpose because they do not want that shit to spread. They don't want those ideas about solidarity and, anti-colonialism to spread. But, I think about also like someone like Edward Said dying in his 60s.
yeah,
I think about what shortens a life and, I think about Angela Davis seeing that future and being like, I gotta try to be around. And so now I think the only thing that I think about futurism. I think about like, I have to, no matter what, keep convincing myself and everyone around me of a free Palestine, and I have to be alive long enough to see it.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I like that. I like the idea of Palestinian futurism. I am
Yeah.
very much inspired by the work of Sun Ra, and
Nice.
the work and the world of Afrofuturism in general,
Hmm.
because I saw it as sort of like a utopian vision that was different. Like, because when you're raised in white society, you get utopian visions informed by white
Yeah.
society, and this seemed something. If I don't know if it's better, but just different,
Yeah.
and like as a result of that difference, filled with more hope somehow.
Yeah. I think that, we see that these structures, as I said before, like we see that these institutions, these world leaders, these structures do not represent us anymore and kind of like any real level. So at this point, the way I feel about it is that like those institutions need new blood to stay alive. They need us to keep believing in them. And if no one cared about the New York Times anymore, they'd just die.
Mm-hmm.
Like You know what I mean? If no one wanted to write for Marvel or DC anymore, they'd fizzle out. Like it's just kind of like I think that at this point, corporations have convinced themselves that they're too big to fail, and we're seeing in real time that that is 100% not true.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm saying that, and that's like a weird time to be saying this because it is also during a time of like I work in games, and it is a
Oh
terrifying
yeah, it's a
time.
big upheaval, a layoffs
Uh,
everywhere. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't think I'm going to find a job in games at all anytime
Ugh.
soon. But, the thing about that is that now I'm like, okay, these institutions obviously cannot keep they can't function anymore. Like we're
Yeah.
watching them break down before our eyes. We have to find new ways of imagining the world because there is going to be an after, as much as they don't want us to think about the after. They're
Yeah.
just trying to keep us in this moment until they can figure out how to get control back. But like, I don't know
Yeah,
if you're
I
gonna
think
do
that's
that, man.
important. I think trying to because we are so stuck with this sense of normalcy, this hyper
Mhm.
normalization, as like the Adam Curtis documentary says, this the idea we're in this endless loop of just sticking to the status quo. I think now more than ever, it's like if you're trying to do artwork, trying to think about visions of the future, maybe not utopian visions
Yeah,
necessarily, but things that could be better, ways that
yeah.
it could improve, not just doomerous doomsday visions, but maybe ideas of, because how many astronauts said that they were inspired to do what they did because of Star Trek?
Yeah, yeah,
I think as much as silly as it is, and art is always being an artist is the endless process of trying to justify the own uselessness of your vocation. But that's the beauty of it too. That's the
yeah.
wonder of it. It gives itself because it is useless. It can only be given as a gift because there is no inherent point to it. And that
I, I
is, yeah.
I think about this thing. I think about that thing about how they say that like you can't imagine a new face in a dream. You can just kind of remix features or like a face you saw on the street or something like that, that you can't just like come up with a face you've never seen.
Mm-hmm,
And I think about that like, and I think about like that in art a lot about
mm-hmm,
like how if you don't remix the world for
yeah.
someone else, they will never see it remixed. A lot of genre writing that I find really weak is one that just recreates the hierarchies that we live in without any kind of like exploration of why they work or what's going on in them or how they can be disrupted or if they can be disrupted or what they even mean. I think that like if you just recreate the same power structures and hierarchies, kind of word for word without challenging it or even exploring it at all, it's kind of like, then why are you doing it? Because the point, yeah, art is like we can remix reality into
Mm-hmm,
anything. And it is kind of like I love that Ursula Le Guin quote where she like
yeah.
I literally looked it up to make sure that like we live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings.
Yeah.
And any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art, and very often in our art, the art of words. And that's kind of where I'm at with art now, is where I'm like, hey, I need to like Squire itself was very much that for me too. It was
Mm-hmm,
about like history specifically and
yeah.
like the way that history is presented as this unshakable narrative because the history that we're taught is an Israeli history. Most people are know like that version of events, but history is you know, it's always a one narrative. It's not like it's someone taking events and choosing how to make it into a story because stories is how we understand things.
Mm-hmm,
Even in ancient times, like they would make up stories about the stars to
yeah.
explain things because that's how we get things.
Yeah.
That's
And
why we tell
stories,
kids stories,
yeah,
right?
they're always dreams too, because the nature of
Yeah.
reality is much more mercurial and fucked up. It's much
Oh,
more
yeah.
closer to like James Joyce Ulysses stream of consciousness stuff than it is to, declarative sentences about
Yeah.
someone, verbing to the adjective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. That's totally true. Yeah, you're right. It's a total like it's a framework that we could like try to like it's like language, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
where we decide things mean things and we use that to help organize ourselves and our minds. And history is, kind of like that story, but there's always someone telling it and there's always a reason for it being told. So with Squire, I just really wanted to challenge the idea of a neutral, singular history for any specific group of people, race, or region. Or religion even, because I'm a Christian Palestinian, which is a whole thing because people do not ever
they don't
believe
think
I
you
exist.
exist. Yeah. No, you guys were the first Christians. You
literally
guys were the first
Bethlehem,
ones.
bro.
Yeah.
I'm like literally like
The
my
birthplace.
what do you
right
mean?
there. Yeah.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, Palestine is a futurism. So I'm like, I think that like, yeah, I love Afrofuturism too. So I'm like, I've been thinking a lot in that framework. Not that everything I'm going to do is futurism, but I'm definitely working on a Palestinian futurism project right now for sure.
That sounds very enticing. I like that idea a lot. And I think that's a good time to wrap up too. Nadia, you've been so great. I love hearing you talk. You gabby and inspired, and you've got a lot of good insights. Where can they find you? Where can the listeners find you?
Well, they can unfortunately find me on Twitter,
No.
where Nadia, I know, right? Nadia Nadia_SHAMMAS_. There's some other Nadia Shammas sitting on it who hasn't tweeted since like 2016, and I'm like, I'm begging you to delete your account so I can take your name. But I'm the only Nadia Shammas, just NADIASHAMMAS on Instagram. Those are where you can find me. And yeah, thank you for having me. I do love talking, and this was a lot of fun. Next time we'll talk about horror. I saw you had this.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the creator of Skinamarink on here, which is like, and I was so
Kyle,
yeah, jealous, but
rules.
also like most terrifying thing I've ever seen. I was like, whatever mental illness I have, this dude has too, for sure.
You could probably, I think he's taken a break off of Twitter, but he's very accessible. You could probably DM him. I'm sure he'd be into your stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and everyone should watch Skinamarink. That's a reminder.
Yeah, no, it's one of the best movies I've ever seen. Go watch it.
It's the best fight. Yeah, captures a childhood memory that I forgot that I had. And
it captures a childhood memory I wish I could forget forever.
I can't imagine Palestinian Skinamarink is a very
no, but that's the thing is you come home with PTSD and you don't know what PTSD is, so then your brain is just like, oh, it's nighttime, time to rescramble reality. Burp, 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 burp.
Here's the face that's gonna kill me. Yeah.
Yep, basically. Yeah. Don't turn around or Bloody Mary's gonna jump from the ceiling.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, anyway, Skinamarink rules. Free Palestine.
Free Palestine. Thank you so much for coming on.
No worries. Thanks, man.